إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we are gathered here on behalf of Muslim Ummah of North America, Department of Human Justice and Human Dignity is organizing this continuing conversation. We have with us an esteemed guest, Brother Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Inshallah, we will start our program with recitation from Holy Quran. I'm asking Brother Isamuddin Ahmed from New York City to recite from Holy Quran. Brother Isam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا ترى فيها عوجا ولا أمتا يومئذ يتبعون الداعي لا عوج له وخشعت الأصوات للرحمن فلا تسمع إلا همسا يومئذ لا تنفع الشفاعة إلا من أذن له الرحمن ورضي له قولا يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون به علما وعنت الوجوه للحي القيوم وقد خاب من حمل ظلما ومن يعمل من الصالحات وهو مؤمن فلا يخاف ظلما ولا هضما وكذلك أنزلناه قرآنا عربيا وصرفنا فيه من الوعيد لعلهم يتقون أو يحدث لهم ذكرا فتعالى الله الملك الحق ولا تعجل بالقرآن من قبل أن يقضى إليك وحيه وقل رب زدني علما ولقد عهدنا إلى آدم من قبل فنسي ولم نجد له عزما وإذ قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم فسجدوا إلا إبليس أبى فقلنا يا آدم إن هذا عدو لك ولزوجك فلا يخرجنكما من الجنة فتشقى إن لك ألا تجوع فيها ولا تعرى وأنك لا تظمأ فيها ولا تضحى فوسوس إليه الشيطان قال يا آدم هل أدلك على شجرة الخلد وملك لا يبلى فأكلا منها فبدت لهما سوآتهما وطفقا يخصفان عليهما من ورق الجنة وعصى آدم ربه فغوى ثم اجتباه ربه فتاب عليه وهدى قال اهبطا منها جميعا بعضكم لبعض عدو فإما يأتينكم مني هدى فمن اتبع هداي فلا يضل ولا يشقى ومن أعرض عن ذكري فإن له معيشة ضنكا ونحشره يوم القيامة أعمى قال رب لم حشرتني أعمى وقد كنت بصيرا قال كذلك أتتك آياتنا فنسيتها وكذلك اليوم تنسى وكذلك نجزي من أسرف ولم يؤمن بآيات ربه ولعذاب الآخرة أشد وأبقى أفلم يهد لهم كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون يمشون في مساكنهم إن في ذلك لآيات لأولي النهى ولولا كلمة سبقت من ربك لكان لزاما وأجل مسمى فاصبر على ما يقولون وسبح بحمد ربك قبل طلوع الشمس وقبل غروبها ومن آناء الليل فسبح وأطراف النهار لعلك ترضى ولا تمدن عينيك إلى ما متعنا به أزواجا منهم زهرة الحياة الدنيا لنفتنهم فيه ورزق ربك خير وأبقى وأمر أهلك بالصلاة واصطبر عليها لا نسألك رزقا نحن نرزقك والعاقبة للتقوى وقالوا لولا يأتينا بآية من ربه أولم تأتهم بينة ما في الصحف الأولى ولو أنا أهلكناهم بعذاب من قبله لقالوا ربنا لولا أرسلت إلينا رسولا فنتبع آياتك من قبل أن نذل ونخزى قل كل متربص فتربصوا فستعلمون من أصحاب الصراط السوي ومن اهتدى صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khairan. Allahu Akbar. Brother Isam, Hafiz Isamuddin Ahmed, you have a very beautiful voice.
Yes.
Very good. Jazakallah khairan.
Wonderful. MashaAllah.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. So let me introduce our guest today. We are really delighted that we have Brother Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Brother Edward Ahmed Mitchell is the Deputy Director of CARE. We all know CARE, Council on American Islamic Relationship, which is the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization in US. Brother Edward Mitchell, before joining in Washington, D.C., he was the Executive Director of CARE in Georgia. He graduated from Georgetown University with a degree in law. He's a lawyer by profession. He also writes. He practiced in the criminal as a criminal prosecutor in city of Atlanta, and he worked as a journalist in Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So we are really glad that we have Brother Ibrahim Mitchell, and as we know that we are currently as a country facing some unprecedented events, police shooting, and recently with George Floyd incident, things are actually standing right in front of our eyes. We see that just for simple infraction, people of color are spending 17, 18 years in jail. On the other hand, just as oblivious as college admission scandal is, or many other infractions, some high-profile college athlete for really obscene crime, they're only getting 7-8 days of jail, few months of jail. So we often hear this terminology that our criminal justice system is broken. So today we would like to have sort of a different way of our event. We want this event to be kind of interactive. So I will be asking Brother Abdullah Mitchell, Brother Edward Ahmed Mitchell, some questions, and he's going to answer us. And again, from the audience, people who are on the phone, you can press *5. I will know that you have question. I can unmute you. You can ask questions. Also, those who are watching us live on Facebook and YouTube, you can post your question as well. Inshallah, we'll try to answer. So when we hear the term that our criminal justice system is broken, what does the terminology actually mean, criminal justice system? That's my first question to Brother Edward Mitchell, if you take
this. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So first, let me say thank you to the Muslim Ummah of North America for hosting this important conversation, welcoming me to join you. It's a pleasure to be with you. May Allah preserve you and your families, and may Allah especially reward that young man for his beautiful recitation of the Quran. So as you noted, brother, my experience here is unique in that I am a civil rights attorney who previously served as a criminal prosecutor. So I've in some ways been on both sides of this issue, seen the system from the inside out. And so the first question you asked was, when people say the criminal justice system is broken, what does that terminology mean? Well, first, let's talk about what the criminal justice system is. When we say the criminal justice system, we're not just talking about the police. We're not just talking about prosecutors. We're not even just talking about prison. We're talking about all aspects of the judicial system from beginning to end involving criminal issues. So from the moment someone is suspected of committing a crime, the moment a community is being subjected to police surveillance because of supposed fear of that being a high crime area, from the monitoring to the moment of investigation, to the moment of arrest, to the moment of prosecution, to the moment of sentencing, to the moment of imprisonment, that whole process, everything that happens within that is considered the criminal justice system in America. So again, anything from not just you being arrested, but from the moment a community is being targeted, being surveilled, being monitored by the police, to the moment someone is investigated, arrested, prosecuted, sentenced, imprisoned, or whatever else the punishment may be, fined, put on probation, all of that falls under the umbrella of the criminal justice system. Now, the next part is, well, when people say the criminal justice system is broken, what does that mean? And there are really two theories I've heard about this. The first theory is that the criminal justice system is not broken, that in fact it is working exactly as it was meant to work. And under this theory, the criminal justice system is designed to target people who are impoverished, designed to target largely people of color, while giving a break to people who are of higher class, higher socioeconomic status, especially people who are white Americans. And then that is largely what the system often does. So some people say the system was designed that way and that it is working exactly as it was meant to work. And others say, no, 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 the criminal justice system, our justice system, is meant to be just and fair, liberty for all, and that what we're seeing, the injustices in the system, are flaws. It's not the way it's supposed to be, and we just need to fix the system. Both of these perspectives have valid arguments. It's absolutely fair to say that in some ways the system is working as it was designed, that there are inherent flaws and injustices in the system that have existed for centuries since its inception. But it's also fair to say that the theory behind the criminal justice system, some of the things like the right to an attorney, the right to due process, that these basic fundamental values and traditions of the system, if implemented properly, are wonderful things that should make the system work, and sometimes do make it work effectively. But that's not always the case, and so much of it depends on your race, your economic status, your zip code, and that is what makes it a really unfair system, that the outcome of your situation, whether or not you're being heavily monitored by the police, whether or not you are being suspected of crimes, caught for crimes, prosecuted, convicted, significantly punished, all of that can very easily be determined not by what you did, but by your race, your economic status, and your zip code. And the fact that those factors can easily be used to determine how you're going to fare in the criminal justice system means that there is something wrong with the system. If the system is truly blind to race, to class, to your location, then those factors should not matter. There should not be a higher rate of black people, a higher rate of poor people, a higher rate of whatever based on your immutable characteristics that are leading you to be impacted by the criminal justice system. So again, when people say the criminal justice system, that's what they're referring to, everything from the policing to the investigation to the arrest to the prosecution to the conviction to the sentencing. And when we say the system is broken, two theories. First theory is that no, the system is working as it was meant to work. And the other theory is that no, the system itself is not inherently wrong. It's just being implemented in an incorrect way.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer. The second question I have is that you have a very unique situation. You worked as a criminal prosecutor, as a civil rights attorney. Now you are working for a civil rights advocacy group. So you have seen the system, criminal justice system from within.
Yeah.
So in your opinion or in your experience, what problems did you see within the criminal justice system you described earlier?
Yeah, sure. So, so as mentioned, I served as a prosecutor in the city of Atlanta, and I was in that position for 3 years. And I worked for the city of Atlanta, so I was mainly handling misdemeanors, city violations. That could be everything from drunk driving to minor drug possession to fighting to car accidents. Nothing that was involving the death of anyone, right? So it was kind of those more so crimes that are more common and happen to a lot of people. And so on a given day, I would see literally hundreds of people coming in and out of court dealing with those sort of offenses. And I did that for 3 years. And then obviously I left that career behind and I shifted to civil rights law as the director of CARE Georgia down in the city of Atlanta. And I then did that for about 4 years before joining the CARE National Office. So again, I've been on both sides of this. I've represented families who lost loved ones to police brutality, and on the other side, I work with police officers dealing with criminal prosecution. So having been on both sides of it, the observations I would make are this. Number one, there is many things inherently flawed about the system as is. It's not just that you've got bad people working within the system. There are some fundamental structures in the system that make it unjust and flawed. Number two, observation I would make is that having good people doing this work can make the system better. I worked in the city of Atlanta, which, as you know, is an African-American led city, majority African-American city for many decades. And most of the prosecutors in my office were people of color, and the lead prosecutor was an African-American. And so, when you get people who come from the same background as the people in a city, who know what it's like to grow up in a certain environment, who know what it's like to be victimized by a flawed system, then that can lead the prosecutors to become more merciful, more understanding, and to try to develop alternatives to common prosecution methods. So, for example, some of the positive things that were done in the city of Atlanta were diversion programs where, if you were a young person who came in with an offense, such as you were, caught smoking marijuana or you've done something dangerous with the car, you could go through some sort of community service, some classes, some education, meeting with families who've been impacted by that sort of bad behavior. And then if you completed your responsibilities, your charge is wiped away, you're free and clear, you go on with your life to give you a second chance. And if you made a second mistake, you could still go through a program that could end up with your charge being dismissed. If you committed a third mistake, same thing, there were still programs that could be arranged for you to still walk away with a clean record and carry on with your life. And then there were also programs for older people who were for example, addicted to substances or were homeless and things like that, and were just trapped in a cycle. There were programs for them. But those programs, did not help everyone, and it really didn't solve the problem. On the flip side, you had many people, especially homeless people, who would be arrested for petty offenses, sleeping in public on public streets, public drunkenness, public urination. They'd be arrested and taken to jail. And the offense itself is minor. The offense itself is something you should be able to get out of jail very easily. But the problem is that in our criminal justice system, often you have to bond out of jail, meaning in order to get out of jail, you have to put up some amount of money to convince the court that you will return one day to handle your charge. And of course, if you're homeless, you can't afford to put up pretty much anything to get out of jail, $100, $20, $250. So if your bail is set, for example, at $100, that's all it takes to get out of jail. You're homeless, you have no family, well, you're stuck in jail, potentially for weeks or months at a time. And that's obviously just inherently unjust, that your freedom is lost, not because of what you did, but because you can't afford to pay for your freedom. And so that kind of injustice is common in cities across the country. Other things that you notice is that when you walk into court, you clearly see that for most offenses, the vast majority of people sitting in court are people of color. And that's not always the case. For example, when I prosecuted drunk driving, that looked a little more eclectic. That I ended up seeing many more white people, white Americans arrested for that offense than I saw people of color. But other things, petty offenses like traffic violations, your tags out, your headlights out, speeding, things that everyone does, you would often see people of color being picked up and cited for those things much more than other people. And that's especially true with drug crimes. people of color being targeted at a much higher rate, even though black people, people of color, do not use drugs at a higher rate than white people. So these are some of the problems that I observed working within the system. Now then, on the outside of the system, obviously, there have been so many attempts made to address these issues, and they've had some success in Atlanta. For example, the city of Atlanta ended up significantly changing some of their procedures, from closing down their city detention center, so there's no longer that giant city jail that was holding homeless people for months at a time, to ending cash bail, meaning that people no longer, in most circumstances, are trapped in jail because they cannot pay their bail money for those sort of minor offenses. And at cities and counties around the country, you're seeing pressure being put to change the way that law enforcement, that our criminal justice system operates. Now, again, the question becomes, is that enough? Is it enough to try to change the system from within, or is the system so flawed that you just got to tear the whole thing down and start over with something very different? And that's obviously a debate we've been having in recent months. Many people calling on defunding the police, abolishing the police, and offering different ideas for what could happen in its place. And that's obviously a very complex conversation with many valid perspectives on all sides of the issue. I would just say that, having been on both sides of the criminal justice system, both as a prosecutor and now a civil rights attorney, I do believe that the system is inherently flawed, inherently unfair in many ways, and it requires radical change to fix. It doesn't mean that you can't try to fix the system from the inside. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to change the policies that we can. But even as we do that, I think we have to keep in mind that it's going to take some radical changes if we really want to see people being treated differently in this country.
Thank you, Brother Mitchell. Then a follow-up question with your discussion that you alluded to it a little bit, that African Americans are disproportionately targeted, or you have seen them, although you cited example of drug use, although the percentage of drug use is higher among people of other race, but disproportionately African Americans are targeted and picked up for this offense. So how and why is African American community negatively affected by the criminal justice system, in your opinion?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, so it's a long story, right? This is not a new thing, right? Whether you're talking about communities of color being over-policed, whether you're talking about communities of color being disproportionately investigated for crimes that everyone commits, when you're talking about communities of color being disproportionately arrested for crimes, including crimes they didn't commit, and when you're talking about higher rates of prosecution, because sometimes people are arrested, investigated, and then the case just goes by the wayside, it's not heavily prosecuted. And when you're talking about, and this is very important, the rate of convictions and the rate of harsh sentencing, on all those metrics, people of color, especially African Americans, are disproportionately targeted, investigated, arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and punished. So why is that? Obviously, we would say that systemic racism is to blame. What we mean by that is that there are parts of the system that are inherently designed and were made to target and impact people of color. Let's start with police. Many police departments originated way back when, hundreds of years ago, in their original form for the purpose of catching slaves, catching runaway slaves. This is very far back in the 1800s, obviously, before the in the 1800s, some of the earliest police departments, they weren't called police, but these groups of people were banded together for the purpose of catching runaway slaves. And obviously, after slavery ended, the purpose of these things evolved and changed to become more modern, addressing different sorts of crimes, different sorts of issues in criminal papers. That's the first issue, is policing itself, and its very origins in some areas did it originate is towards that issue of targeting black slaves. And that is true in some areas of the country. The second issue you have, of course, is that African Americans are more likely to be living in areas that are economically neglected, that are impoverished. And any area that is more impoverished, economically neglected, you are more likely to see crime, and in particular petty crime, people stealing to live, people self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, people, gangs coming up and because people are trying to make money and and then gangs fighting each other for property and turf and all that stuff. So that is what happens in a socioeconomically deprived area. And of course, African Americans, because of slavery, the failure of Reconstruction, redlining, which is the process of African Americans being literally forced to live in certain areas, segregated areas, in many cases areas that were obviously impoverished and less accessible to easy work environments and a good environment. All this stuff, redlining, and then of course segregation, school segregation, the denial of good jobs to African Americans, all these things that went on for centuries and decades up until very recently. All that contributes to many African Americans being trapped, families for generations being trapped in a cycle of poverty and in areas that are crime-ridden. And of course, the police often will go after the low-hanging fruit. It's easier to catch someone, using drugs or being publicly drunk or stealing, from a convenience store than it is to catch some rich businessman who's cheating on his taxes, or some of the other common things that happen in wealthier communities. And so the police are over-policing and going after the low-hanging fruit of impoverished areas, which inherently is going to mean that you are targeting people of color who are disproportionately suffering poverty in that kind of socioeconomic status. So that's, I think, a major reason why African Americans are disproportionately targeted. But it's not just an issue of economics, it also is an issue of race. You often have police departments that are not reflective of the people they serve and protect. And what I mean by that is you might have a city that's majority black, and then you have police officers who are majority white and don't even live within that city, but live in areas outside the city, the suburbs, or other places, and they come into the city to police a city they don't personally know, right? And when you don't know the people you are meant to serve and protect, right? When you start to view the people that you serve and protect as animals, as people who are less than you, prone to crime, dangerous, and when you carry your own implicit racial biases into the job, then you are more likely, right, to suspect black people of doing something. You're more likely to be afraid that black people are going to do something to you because of your prejudices, and you're more likely to overreact and hurt a person of color, or to overpunish them, and end up, of course, in the once you get to the prosecution point, over prosecuting and over punishing them. And of course, you see that when you get to court in terms of juries that are in some cases still very much short of the sort of racial diversity they should have. You see prosecutors still in many cases kicking people of color off of juries under false pretenses of having some legitimate issue with the juror being involved in the case. And then, of course, you have judges that we have seen will often over-sentence people of color, and that's sometimes because of the judge, but also sometimes because of disparities in the laws themselves that mandate harsher punishments for crimes that are more likely to be committed by people who are impoverished. So all these things together, poverty, economic status, social status, redlining, segregation, all of the things that we're experiencing today are really after effects of things that went on for centuries and decades in this country. So when I hear people say, and including some Muslims, by the way, say, why can't black people just get their stuff together and lift themselves up by their own bootstraps? Well, that's really easy to say. But you have to remember, African Americans are deprived of black people were brought to this country as slaves, deprived of our names, our culture, our religion, our families, our parents, our siblings, and then even when we were free, deprived of our true freedom, right? Not able to live in peace and freedom where we wanted to be, subject to lynching and racial terrorism, segregation, denial of jobs, not able to pursue the careers we wanted to pursue, that we were intellectually capable of pursuing. And it was really only 40, 50 years ago that segregation started to officially end, and it took a while. So you're really talking about not until the 1970s and 80s that you really, really saw full, significant desegregation at the legal level, and even then, not really full. So there is still much more work to be done. Black people have made amazing progress given all the stuff that's been on our shoulders, but there's still work to be done, especially in terms of how we are treated in the criminal justice system.
Thank you. And just a supplemental question that you mentioned. You mentioned in your answer that harsher punishment are designed on the crimes that are likely to be committed by some communities that are struggling in terms of economically. So an example of that, and I think nothing can be as fragrant as that, as the crack cocaine and the heroin possession penalty. So can you just elaborate that a little bit to our audience, that how it is sometimes by design as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the common examples that we cite, because it's the most blatant and remarkable, is powder cocaine versus crack cocaine. That is, for many years, if you were convicted of possessing crack cocaine, which is more likely to be, cheaper, more likely to be accessible by people who are impoverished, in particular the Black community, you could be facing a much harsher punishment than if you were arrested, convicted for possessing powder cocaine, which is more expensive and more likely to be possessed by people who are of a higher economic status, i.e. white people. But obviously that's not the only thing. If you look at our federal sentencing guidelines, a big problem with them is that they have such strict standards for what punishments you have to experience for various crimes, and it doesn't give a lot of flexibility. And the benefit of doing that was that the federal government was trying to standardize punishments and sentences so that you weren't getting a harsher punishment being convicted of a federal crime in Arkansas than you were being convicted of a crime in California. So they made the uniform federal sentencing guidelines. So the problem then is that you then made it universally bad in many cases because crime and punishment, it's not as simple as mathematics, right? There's a human element here that judges have to be able to consider. And they have to be able to consider that it's much more likely that the defendant that's going to end up in front of them is a person of color, much more likely. And so if that's the case, even if you are imposing standard universal sentencing guidelines that are just, they are what they are, you're not deviating, you're just giving out the set punishment. Well, if the people who are people of color are more likely to go in front of you, even though they're not more likely to commit the crime, then you're still having an unfair outcome because Black people are being more harshly targeted, prosecuted, arrested, and punished than other people based, again, on their race and their economic status. So those are some inherent issues with sentencing. And again, at the local level, putting aside the federal issue, at the local level, so much discretion is given to local prosecutors to decide what they're going to prosecute, how they're going to prosecute it, that in areas like in Georgia, where you saw the Ahmed Arbery case, the people who shot Ahmed Arbery were on the verge of getting away with it. Multiple prosecutors did not want to charge them. Those men were going to get away with this until that video came out, and mashallah, the authorities were forced to take action. But the issue is, if you've got elected prosecutors, DAs, district attorneys who have a political bent and answer to politics, and they're prosecuting a certain way, and then if you have career prosecutors who are all of a certain racial background, economic background, who go into prosecution, then that's swaying how cases are being handled as well. So that's why I really don't fault people of color who decide they are going to go into prosecution with an eye to changing the system from within, because even though you may not be able to really fully change it, until it is changed, it is better, I think, to have good people doing the job for the sake of making the system less bad. Maybe it's still not good, but at least less bad until we can radically change it.
Yeah, that exactly leads my next question, that probably you heard it many times, that Brother Edward, we know, again, what you have said or what you have been pointing out at, we can all see the flaws in the system. But how do we fix it?
Yeah. So look, at every level of the system, there are different solutions, right? So if you're talking about the first problem being over-police, well, actually, take it out. If the first problem is poverty, because that is the issue that usually leads to interaction with the police, right? Then you're not even talking about fixing the criminal justice system. You're talking about addressing the issue of poverty in America. That we are supposedly the richest country on earth, and yet we still have such horrible and significant poverty on metropolitan cities across our country, including cities that are led by people who are quote unquote liberal, progressive, and profess to caring about poor people. So the first issue, I think not the first in chronological order, but a major issue that has to be addressed is the issue of poverty, right? Poverty, especially in major cities. And you address that obviously in so many different ways, and that's a whole nother conversation. But giving people job opportunities, educating people to get them in the workforce, addressing issues of mental illness, banning the box, which is what we mean by that is when people are out of prison, giving them a chance to try to start their life over without having to publicly advertise their criminal history, which harms their ability to get a job. There's so many things that need to be done to address poverty in America. So I won't even go into that because it's not my expertise, but there are many issues that need to happen there. Now, let's talk about then the issue of policing. Communities are being over-policed by police officers who do not know the community and are often not from the community. And so an issue that is being proposed there is to, number one, reduce funding for police departments, over bloated budgets, and put some of that funding into serving and improving and uplifting the community, again, solving that issue of poverty in the community. But then also you would ideally be reducing the number of police officers who are out on patrol in communities. Communities don't feel like they're under occupation. They'll feel like they're being served and protected. If you don't have cops just constantly roaming around looking for petty crimes to catch people for committing, right? So, and then you could try to create community-based initiatives to address small petty crimes that aren't physically hurting people. So, in some areas, and this is, to give you an example, there was a city in New Jersey that abolished their police department, started over, and they saw better outcomes. They saw reductions in crime rates compared to before when they created a different system. In California, you have systems where instead of the police being called for people experiencing mental health issues, which often happens and leads to tragic results, you have mental health counselors who are brought out to the community to address those issues. And so the point is that the police need to be put in a situation where they're not being asked to do every possible job in a community. They are not social workers. They're not mental health counselors. Police officers are meant to address crime and stop crime. And so we've got to make sure that we are, to the extent that the police continue to operate, that we are significantly limiting the scope of what they do, limiting how much they are out in the community. When we do that, then we're reducing the rate at which communities are over-policed. So again, first issue, poverty. Second issue, over-policing. Third issue is that, yes, crime is real. Crime must be addressed, but it should be addressed in a fair and equitable way. Police should be going after the rich businessman who dodges his taxes, the college kid who's sexually harassing or raping women and getting away because he's rich and white and all that stuff. All those crimes need to be investigated and prosecuted at an equal level, at a fair level, no matter someone's socioeconomic status. So what I mean by that is that we can't have a situation where the police are focusing on just the low-hanging fruit of petty crime. You want to go after crime, go after the crimes that are severely harming people, right? The severe, no matter who's committing them, those real crimes that are being committed that harm human beings, harm people's livelihoods. Let's go after those real issues that do really exist. The next issue that has to be solved is when you get to the stage of jail. Again, you can't have people being trapped in jail because they can't bond out, because they can't pay their bail. Because when the moment someone goes to jail, right, what are they not doing? They're not working. They're not taking care of their family. They're not seeing a doctor, right? They're trapped in an environment with other people accused of crimes, which is not safe, not healthy, not good for their psyche. And eventually when they get out, they're not better for it. They're not ready to become productive members of society. They've just been harmed and are much less likely to become productive members of society. So instead of locking people up and keeping them in jail simply because they can't pay to get out, that has to change. Cash bail has to end. The only reason someone should be locked in jail and not able to bail out is because the crime they committed is so serious that they can't be trusted to be let go because they might flee, or they can't be trusted to be let go because they're a danger to the community. It should not simply be because they can't afford to pay to bail themselves out. So we have to address the issue, reform the issue of how we're dealing with people when they are arrested. And there's got to be widespread use of diversionary programs, especially for young people who are cited for violations, like the stupid things that young kids often do. And even for older people who are trapped in that cycle of substance abuse and all that, we've got to have diversionary programs in which we're not just locking people up and punishing them, but trying to truly rehabilitate people. So diversionary programs are critical in terms of replacing punishment, punitive systems. And then when you get to the rates, when you get to a case that actually has to go to a jury, prosecution, we've got to have juries that are reflective of the communities they are judging. We have got to have judges who are reflective of the communities they are judging. And you've got to have prosecutors who are reflective of the communities they are judging and answerable to those communities. That means that, you know, people who have a progressive view of criminal justice should be running campaigning to be DAs, I believe, to try to change the system from within. Again, as long as the system exists, a lot of people say, tear it down, build something new. All right, but that's not happening right now. So in the meantime, change what you can. And so at that level of prosecution, juries and judges, we've got to have people who are not just all prosecutors serving as judges. We've got to have people who are not just punishment-minded, serving as prosecutors. And we've got to have public defenders' offices being well-funded and well-staffed. Public defenders do important work serving people who can't afford attorneys, but they're overworked, they're underpaid, and they're undermanned. And so we've got to step up our support for public defenders' offices, not slash that support. And then when you get to the issue of sentencing, we have got to become much less punitive in terms of what we are doing with people once they're convicted of crimes. It is unimaginable torture to lock a man or a woman in a tiny cell, half the size of the room I'm in right now, where you can lay down and your head touches one wall, your feet touch the other wall, you stretch your arms out and you're touching two walls, and to lock someone away for 5 years or 10 years, that is truly a cruel, in my opinion, a cruel and barbaric thing to do. People often criticize the Muslim world for the punishments that existed in Islamic law, because they say, well, it's punitive, you're physically harming people and all that, and it's better to put people in jail. Well, look, to me, locking someone up for 20 years of their life away from their family, that is cruel. That does something horrible to someone's psyche, especially given all the horrible things that happen to people in jail. So we've got to move away from thinking that, treating, tossing out years of imprisonment like we're tossing out candy, right? This is a really horrible thing. And if a judge or a prosecutor had to spend, I believe, 1 month sitting in jail, just to see what it's like, they would become much less likely to be tossing out punishments right and left. They would realize how serious this issue is to lock someone away and really give thought to punishments, I'll say sentences that are more rehabilitative than punitive. And by the way, that's not to say that some people don't need to go to jail. Yes, there are people who commit serious crimes. They do it over and over again. They cannot be trusted to be out in society. Child molesters, armed robbers, obviously, people who commit rapists and people who commit other serious crimes, obviously cannot be trusted to be let back into society, especially in short order. But when we're talking about, petty crimes, crimes that don't harm other people, significantly harm other people, those sorts of things, we really have to move away from thinking of these very harsh punishments, especially years and years and years in jail. And then in terms of people who are in jail, we've got to start thinking of ways that jail is not just a time to drive people crazy, but really an opportunity to rehabilitate people. So, having school in jail. If you look at what Europe does with people in jail, it is so radically different than what we do with people who are locked in jail. So radically changing how people are treated in imprisonment, the abuse that happens, the petty restrictions that are put upon them, the lack of access to educational materials that some prisoners can get, but not enough can get. All that's really got to change. If you want to rehabilitate people who really do have to be locked up, then let's give them those educational opportunities in jail so that they can get out of jail as better people. And then when someone's out of jail, they've got to be able to start their life over. If they pay their debt to society, they should be able to vote. They should be able to get a job. They should be able to just carry on with their life without having to pay all these ridiculous fines and fees that they'll never be able to pay off since they've been in jail for years not making any making work. Oh, by the way, in jail, we've got to end what is really slave labor, forcing prisoners to engage in manual labor for pennies on the dollar they normally get. If you're going to make prisoners do work, then pay them. Pay them the amount of money they'd be getting if they were outside the prison system working regular jobs. So again, those are some of the changes that need to happen in jail in terms of when they get out of jail. So again, it takes radical reform from beginning to end, from the over-policing to the arresting to the prosecution to the trials, the convictions, to what happens in jail, to what happens when people get out of jail. All those things need to radically change if you want to see an end to the unfairness in the criminal justice system. And by the way, again, even trying to make these changes, maybe it's not enough. Maybe the system needs to be taken down and reconstituted completely in a different way. You know, that is certainly a possibility. But we're just talking about what are the things that we can do to improve the system as long as the system exists in its present form.
Jazakallah khairan. Very, very elaborate answer. My final question to you, and then inshallah we'll take questions from the audience, is that, of course, as a Muslim, we believe in equity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran said, Inna akramakum indallahu atqakum. Piety is basically what is dearer to Allah, not the color of your skin or anything. So as a Muslim community, we definitely denounce racism. We try to be equitable. However, in the macro spectrum, as a community, we don't do enough to change the system itself. So in your opinion, what can Muslim community do as individuals or Muslim organizations like Muna? Alhamdulillah, CARE is doing a very phenomenal job, and some other Muslim civil rights organizations that are encouraged by the activities of CARE, they're doing their part. But as a community, individually or collectively, what can Muslims do to change this criminal justice system that we have currently?
So, I mean, first I would say, I'm not sure I'd say, any of us are doing a phenomenal job. Alhamdulillah, for whatever good we do, we can all, do better. May Allah forgive us for the faults in our work and grant us pure intentions and good work that is beneficial to the community, pleasing to Him. But in terms of what we can do, I think the first thing I say is that, as individuals, don't try to save the world. One of the things that, I think that has been a burden for me sometimes is that you get so caught up thinking about all the things that are going wrong in our country, society, the world at large. What can I do? How can I address that issue, this issue? We can't individually expect to save the world. What you can expect to do is to try to change and improve the world that you control, the world around you. So you start with yourself, then your family, your masjid, your community, your workplace, your neighborhood, your city, your state. You work your way out, right? If you're talking about what you as an individual can do. So as an individual, right, if you want to address the issue of racism, because that's the core we're talking about is racism, and then you first got to address, as a Muslim, yes, I know theoretically racism is wrong and forbidden, but do I have any racist biases, right? Do I have any racist tendencies in myself? Do I refer to Black people with names that are inappropriate in my home language, right? Do I have an issue with, do I have a fear of Black people or people of color? If I'm walking down the street, if I see a person of color coming to my shop, my store, do I treat them a little more differently? Now, do you have some inherent latent biases? If your daughter came home and told you, or your son came home and said, I want to marry a person from a different race, would you faint and then wake up and tell them no? I mean, these are all the individual private biases that many of us may have, and those are things that we internally need to check within ourselves, right? And then in our families, right? Do we have biases in our families? Do your kids say things that are inappropriate about Black people, about people of different races and ethnicities, cultures? Have they picked up silly stuff that they believe that they picked up from you, from their friends, that they think is no big deal, but they say it anyway? Are there things that you can solve in your family to address the issue of racism? Are your kids, having a great time playing video games and playing, but they're not really thinking about what they can do to change the country around them? Or they have no interest in anything except growing up, making money, getting a nice car? Are they kind of adopting that aspect of American culture that's just money, 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 not thinking about what are the positive things they can do as Muslims in America? And this is unique, right? Many Muslims live in countries in which they don't have a say in how their government is run and how society functions. What the king says is what it is. What the elected president says is what it is. You don't have a choice in politics or civic engagement, right? But in America, it's very unique. We have a choice. We have options. We have the ability to influence the world around us. And so I would submit that at least some of us have an obligation on behalf of the community to try to change things for the better, try to give dawah, try to speak out against injustices, try to address the things that we can do. So do you have any of your kids that you're encouraging to take up that work? And then in your masjid, do you have a masjid board that is all one ethnicity, all one culture? Are there any black people, any women on your board? Do you have a situation where people of color, of certain colors, feel excluded from your masjid? You never have a khatib who is black. Do you have people who come for help, and if they're people of a certain background, you reject them and say, you're lazy, you ask for help too often, you need to get a job, why are you coming back over and over again? Are these things that happen in your masjid? And then in community, right? Do you have an issue where the police are over policing a certain part of your community? Do you have people in your community who own businesses, gas stations and such, where they are selling haram things to the black community, right? Do you have businesses that are quick to call the cops on people of color, endangering people in the community? These are things that happen in the community that you could be addressing. And then, of course, in terms of the broader community, politics, your elected officials, are you making sure that you care about more than what impacts you, more than just Islamophobia, that you care about issues that impact your whole community, economic inequality, lack of health care? Are those things that you raise when you have elected officials visit your masajid? These are all things that you can be thinking about that you can try to change in your community. But again, I always encourage people, don't overwhelm yourself thinking too big. Start with what you need to change about yourself, then your family, your masjid, your community, and then go from there. And of course, if you're a Muslim organization, then you want to think big, right? You want to think, is my board diverse? When I hold events, panel discussions, do I have a diverse lineup of speakers? Are we addressing police brutality as often as we are addressing Palestine? Both of which are important issues, very dear to my heart. But we should be addressing one of those things, should not be completely dominant over the other thing. These are both critical issues we should all be addressing. So making sure that we are focusing on the issues both here and at home, and making sure that we are exposing our community, our young people, to those issues that impact our neighbors here in America. Those are all things that we can be doing as individuals, masajid, communities, and organizations, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Now we will take questions from our audience, those who are on the phone line. If you can press *5, I would be able to unmute you, inshallah. So we have few questions from our folks who are listening in Facebook and YouTube as well. So one of the question is, in your opinion, do you think the private prison system has something to do with increased number of incarceration and targeting African Americans?
Yeah, I mean, the private prison system, I believe, is inherently unjust and dangerous. When you are putting, first of all, the idea that, prisoners could be monetized, that is, the more that you have people who are so convinced that there'll be a large number of customers, that is, people in jail, that they are willing to build prisons, right, and hire people to serve as guards. That's the first, principled issue that's a problem. It just shows you that we have such a flawed system that we're guaranteed to have enough people to stock these prisons. The second issue is that, you should not be putting something as important as a jail in the control of private actors. That is something that needs to be supervised and controlled by government employees, government agencies, government officials, not private businesses that answer to the government, but the government itself needs to control prisons, and the employees at prisons, prison guards, need to be government employees who've gone through all of the government training that is due, not private actors. And then the last thing I would say is that the only way to address this issue, I don't believe in reforming private prisons. I think that it needs to be abolished and banned. Some states are already taking steps to do that. That private prisons should not exist, that private prisons should not, that capitalism should not extend to the area of imprisonment. That should be a thing that the government is controlling and leading and running.
Jazakallah khairan. We have another question from audience, is that if you look into the recent police shooting, almost 99 out of 100 police shooting charges ended up with the police officers being acquitted. So if that is the case, then how can people have trust on the criminal justice system, on the judiciary? Because it looks like there is a nexus between judges, juries, and the police officials who are all elected somehow, and they feed each other.
Right.
So
well, this is why people don't trust the system, because it's rare that an officer is fired for killing an unarmed person. It's rare that they are arrested for it. It's rare that they're prosecuted for it. And it's very rare that they are convicted for it. In Minnesota, it was funny, the prosecutor there, who was originally handling the killing of George Floyd, he kept saying, look, our office is the only office that has achieved a conviction of a police officer in recent years for killing an unarmed person. And the irony was that the police officer they were talking about that they convicted was a Somali Muslim who was arrested for killing a white Australian woman. So I'm not surprised that he was arrested and prosecuted and convicted for killing a white woman. That's I'm not saying he shouldn't have been, but I'm not surprised that was the outcome there. The issue is that you've got white police officers killing black people of color, black people and others, and then not being arrested, not being fired, not being prosecuted. And then when they are prosecuted, often getting off. And it's not only because of bias among juries and judges, it's really because the legal standards that officers benefit from protect them, right? There's a very high standard you have to meet to convict a police officer of committing murder, of committing manslaughter, of having violated their oath. And you have this doctrine of qualified immunity that also makes it very hard to hold officers accountable as well. So that needs to change. Qualified immunity needs to go. The standards, the policing standards that allow officers to use deadly force and other force in general need to be severely limited and restricted. And when that happens, when the rules of the game change, then you might see a different outcome of the game. But as long as the rules are stacked in favor of police officers, then you're likely not going to see a change in the outcome, even if the case goes to a jury. And by the way, it also needs to be easier to sue prosecutors for prosecutorial malfeasance. Right now, prosecutors are almost always protected from facing consequences, even when they commit serious violations and carrying out their duties. That needs to change. It needs to also be easier to relate ethics to the law in terms of carrying out their duties by hiding evidence and other such things.
Jazakallah khairan.
Right.
Another question that we have is that, of course, there is economic. You alluded to that in your question. There is economic part. Now, sometimes the movement get kind of overshadowed by some of the looting involved and other things. So as a Muslim community, the whole Black Lives Movement, we would like to support, and we do support that. So from the rational point of view, from the ethical point of view, how do you balance between supporting the movement, but at the same time allude to what looting and other things that are taking place? How do you balance your loyalty per se?
Right. So what I would say to Muslims who have this issue, well, what about, and people ask this question, people who are of good intentions and aren't trying to be difficult or trying to find an excuse not to support the movement against anti-Black racism. People of good faith will sometimes say, yeah, I understand. I disagree with police brutality, but I don't like the looting. I don't like the this and the that. And so what I say is that think about the Arab Spring. Many Muslims in America and around the world supported the Arab Spring, right? Looting occurred during Arab Spring protests. Some violence occurred during the Arab Spring protests. That wasn't called for by the leaders of the protest. That wasn't advocated for by the vast majority of people engaged in the protest. But there are some bad apples who engage in bad behavior. In fact, in Egypt during the Arab Spring, there are multiple incidents of women being attacked, harassed, raped on the streets by bad people taking advantage of these massive crowds being out. Now, does that mean that we can't support freedom for our Muslim brothers and sisters in Egypt or Libya or wherever because some bad actors acted a fool in the midst of protests? No, of course not, right? You can distinguish between bad apples in a crowd and the crowd itself being motivated by bad intentions. So in terms of the looting that has occurred and the destruction of property that's occurred, no organization, no civil rights organization, whether Black Lives Matter, the ACLU, CARE, the NAACP, has ever asked for looting or other destruction of property to occur at any one of these protests. If it happens spontaneously, either by people who are, just coming in to take over and cause drama, or by people who are legitimately angry about what has happened. In Minneapolis, the first thing that went up in flames was the police station that these officers came from. And is it okay to burn down public property? As Muslims, we say, no, of course. But can you understand why people would be so mad and take that action? Yes, I can understand. Doesn't mean I justify it, but I can completely understand why people would be so fed up after seeing the slow motion murder of George Floyd and so many other George Floyds that they snap and they take that action. So for us, our obligation is as Muslims who are, especially if you're not directly involved, is not to be nitpicking and looking for opportunities to say, oh, what about that? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? That'll be handled. Looters don't get away with looting. The police, go after them. The issue is that the police are getting away with the crimes they commit. And that's where our focus needs to be. So yes, the destruction is not okay. We're not advocating for it. We don't support it. But let's not let that distract from the fact that Black lives matter and that they don't matter enough to many people and power in our country.
Thank you very much, Brother Edward Mitchell. It's past 10 o'clock, so thank you very much. We have a few other questions, but inshallah we'll answer them next time. Now we are joined by our national vice president, our formal national president, Brother Abu Ahmed Nuruzzaman. Inshallah, I will ask Brother Abu Ahmed Nuruzzaman to conclude the session with his concluding speech. Please.
Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulil Kareem. Dear respected brother and the guest and the listener and the audience, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, thank you, Brother Edward Ahmed. Michelle, thank you for presenting us very nicely a topic which is not talked about all the time, and people always talk about racism, systemic racism, but we want to know from a person who knows the ins and outs and can tell us what's going on. When something happened, people always see the first offense, but what is the news behind the news? What is in the background? We don't know. And I like the way you presented so nicely, and you said it's not broken, it is working. You are designed in such a way so that you can get that kind of result, and what we're getting now. So this is why Muslim Ummah of North America, we are continuing this conversation so that we can know, we can look back and we can learn. And especially our young generation, they can learn about their past. What we see is not the reality. Reality has started many, many years back. So yes, there are a lot of good people. And of course, America has come so far because of the good people. But when people come in the system and when they manipulate the system, and this is what you get. So unless you really change the system that benefit everybody, see equally, and everybody can have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So this is what we need to talk in ourselves, in our family, in our masjid, in our community, and in our workplace and beyond. I think this is the right time. This is the right time. Yes, we have a lot of emotion. We have a lot of anger and other things, but also we have to act wisely, and we have to find out what are the pinpoint and pressure point. Where is something wrong that we need to change and fix? You cannot just bring down everything and make something new. No, that never happens. Civilization builds up one after another. Yes, the judicial system and everything was designed for a class. But when the country became independent, and then civil rights movement started, and many things were accepted, but still we did not get, we have not got what we're supposed to get. So I think this is the time to have a very healthy conversation with everybody and find out those pressure points, and let's change one after another, one after another. And I think the first thing we can do is like, let's learn about it, and let's get up and raise our voice and speak to the people, elect the people, and reach out those people who can change and bring fairness for everybody. So thank you all for joining today, and we hope we will keep going this conversation, because this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. So yes, let's go, let's run many miles. And thank you, brother Edward. Keep up your good works, and mashallah, you're doing good work in Atlanta, and now we are in DC, and of course our community and people in this country will get benefit from you and from the spirit of Islam. So where good thing, we're supposed to be promoting all the good thing, and if something bad and wrong going on, we should stand against of it. It could be myself in my community, it could be in my masjid, in and beyond. So I thank you all, and I hope, inshallah, we'll keep going. We'll keep conversation going, and we want our young generation and everybody to learn. And remember, nothing will happen from nowhere. You got to do something, and everybody has a role to play. Everyone has a role to play, and we will hope, inshallah, we'll get the knowledge first, and then we will find out how we can play our role. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Subhanak Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakallahu khairan. See you next time, everyone.
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Ahmed Nuruzzaman. Thank you for your enlightening concluding remark. With that, inshallah, would like to conclude. But before I conclude, I would like to thank again Brother Edward Mitchell. Inshallah, hope we can see you again. Would always welcome you. And this is a continued conversation. We would like to have this conversation, and we would like to educate our community, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that Allah does not change the fate of the nation unless they try themselves. So we have to try ourselves first before we keep on complaining on how bad the system is. And the first step towards making a change is to know. And this is basically what we are trying to do. Again, thank you very much to those who joined us over the phone, over Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Jazakallah khairan. May Allah bless your time, and may Allah help us implement whatever we have learned, practice what we are preaching. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.